Have you ever wondered why people from different countries or even different parts of your own country behave differently? Or maybe why groups that you belong to have such a strong influence on your behaviors? In this chapter, we're going to be able to explore the world of culture and group dynamics, and of course, how those shape who we are. So, for this lecture, we'll start by exploring the very essence of culture, unpacking the ways that it shapes who we are beyond just our biology. Then we'll shift gears to examine the social side of humanity, asking why we naturally form groups and how these groups evolve. Ideally, this lecture will equip you with understanding both the power of shared identity within groups and the dynamics between them. And finally, we'll understand how cultures can act as social groups by exploring traditional cultural groups alongside more contemporary phenomena like cancel culture and hookup culture. So let's go ahead and get started with section one, where we'll lay the groundwork for defining culture and exploring its key components. Obviously, culture is a term that we use frequently, but it's important to understand its depth and complexity. Therefore, we'll start with defining and describing culture. And according to our text, the culture of a society encompasses its customs, beliefs, knowledge, art, language, and all of it's passed down from generation to generation, and it forms the foundation for everyday practices and behaviors. Culture influences our self concept, including how we attribute personal success or failures. It also impacts social processes such as conformity, compliance, and obedience. And of course, social scientists liken culture to a traffic system. So just as roads, cars, traffic lights, and speed limits all work together for a smooth ride, cultural elements interact to shape human behavior. And when you think about different cultures, you may imagine their most visible features, such as variations in clothing, architectural style, or food types, or even how some people and cultures use things like chopsticks where others use forks. There are also differences in religious practices, wedding rituals, and body language. Although these are all apparent examples of cultural differences, many distinctions are harder to see since they are psychological in nature. And just as culture can be seen in dress and food, it can also be seen in morality, identity, and gender roles. People from around the world differ in their views of things like premarital sex, religious tolerance, respect for elders, and even the importance that they place on having fun. Similarly, many behaviors that may seem innate are actually products of culture. Approaches to punishment, for example, often depend on cultural norms for their effectiveness. While the clothing we wear and the food we eat offer a window into different cultures, these outward expressions are just the tip of the iceberg. Our underlying values, shaped by our cultural backgrounds, have a profound impact on who we are. And we see how culture shapes our behaviors in surprising ways. But have you ever wondered why humans are so susceptible to cultural influences in the first place? Well, the answer lies in our very nature as social creatures. So consider the question, are humans more social animals or more so cultural animals? Human beings are identified as social animals in that we seek connections with others, whether personally or professionally. However, different species of animals are also social. And this ideology is not new, in that Aristotle referred to humans as social animals circa 350 BC. He argued that people are fundamentally designed to mutually depend on each other in an information sharing network. So, human social relationships have been compared to the symbiotic relationship between, for instance, bees and flowers, where both species benefit. Now, that said, it's safe to say that there are levels to culture, and humans have the potential for a lot of culture. So, cultures are a progressive form of socialization. Therefore, the advancements of our various cultures are what set us apart as humans from our non human counterparts. And it's worth noting that even some lower level animals, such as certain primates, bees, fruit flies, birds, fish, and invertebrates, are capable of adapting to their surroundings, thus exhibiting culture. For instance, in 2010, a Zambian chimpanzee named Julie sparked a very curious trend. She began inserting a stiff straw like blade of grass into her ear and leaving it there. And she wasn't just monkeying around, she did it repeatedly. But why, you might ask? Was it a practical purpose or a form of self expression? Well, researchers observed this behavior and found that it wasn't an isolated incident. Other chimps in Julie's group started doing the same thing. They too adorned their ears with grass, creating their own version of ear accoutrement. And unlike most cultural traditions among chimpanzee groups, this one seems to serve no concrete function. There's no parent communication associated with it. It's not for food or necessarily mating. So it's like the chimp equivalent of a fashion statement, for other words. And it's akin to humans adopting subcultural fads. Perhaps these chimps are secretly hosting their own runway jungle fashion shows. As culture's style of expression do, the behavior spread from one chimp to another after they observed Julie doing it. And so it's almost as if they decided, hey, that grass in the ear thing, that's a thing that I should do. Let's make it a trend. And so out of the researchers group, 8 out of the 12 chimps in the group eventually joined into the movement. It became their quirky cultural tradition. And so, if you're interested in more exhibitions of animal culture, take a look at this video by The Atlantic that explains the bizarre animal behavior known as animal culture.
This is
Now, think about culture the way that think about the culture that you were reared in. What are some of the values and traditions that characterize it? How did that influence who you are today? So much that we know about culture is due to the work of Geert Hofstede, who developed the cultural dimensions theory as a framework for understanding different cultural differences across countries. And these help us to understand how societies and organizations differ from each other. There are 6 dimensions in total, as evidenced in the figure, and each of them represents a different aspect of culture. So we'll go through these. The first dimension is power distance, and it refers to how much unequal power distribution members of a society or organization accept and expect. Some cultures have greater power disparity than others, as expected. The second dimension is individualism and collectivism, and these refer to the assimilation of individuals into groups. So, in individualistic societies, people prioritize their own self interests, personal goals, and those take precedence. While in collectivist societies, the focus is on group cohesion, harmony, and interdependence. So, those raised in collectivistic cultures value or tend to value collective goals and group well being, whereas those from individualistic cultures stress the needs of the self over the needs of the group. For instance, the United States of America is a textbook example of individualistic culture, represented by the need for independence and autonomy, and of course, prioritizing what one wants over the collective need. The third dimension is masculinity and femininity. Now, masculine cultures value assertiveness, competition, and material success, while feminine cultures emphasize nurturing, quality of life, and cooperation. And it's important to note that these terms refer to the expression of cultural values, not gender roles particularly. The fourth dimension is uncertainty avoidance, and this reflects the society's tolerance for ambiguity, risk, and uncertainty. Cultures that have high uncertainty avoidance prefer structured environments with clear rules, while cultures with low uncertainty avoidance are more comfortable with ambiguity. The fifth dimension is short term versus long term orientation. Some cultures focus on immediate gratification and and short term goals. Others emphasize perseverance, thrift, and long term planning. And the sixth and final dimension is restraint versus indulgence. And this dimension assesses a society's indulgence in pleasure and gratification versus restraint. And so indulgent cultures allow more freedom in enjoying life, while restrained cultures emphasize self discipline and control. And understanding these dimensions can help us navigate etiquette, communication, and behavior across cultures from business to diplomacy. And of course, as previously mentioned, collectivism versus individualism is one of the dimensions in this model, and it's rather popular. So, as we wrap up this discussion in section 1 on culture, we'll emphasize some of the key takeaways. First, remember that culture isn't just a backdrop, it actively forms who we are, it influences how we see ourselves, how we interact with others, and what we consider important. Secondly, culture is multifaceted. It's not a simple checklist of traditions, but a complex and interconnected system. Hosti's dimensions, for instance, help us to understand the various ways culture can differ. And finally, culture isn't static, it changes over time. It's influenced by various factors as well. So, this dynamic nature means that our understanding of culture must also evolve. In essence, culture is a powerful and ever changing force that shapes our lives in profound ways. So, be sure to tune back in for part two as we explore social groups.